wondered what would happen if you ignored an ancient warning? I didn't believe in curses either, until the night my family and I camped in the Black Forest. Now, before I get into what happened to us, you need to understand something about the Black Forest. This isn't your average forest. It's steeped in myth and legend, the kind of place that feels like it holds the weight of centuries of secrets. For as long as anyone can remember, the locals have believed that the Black Forest is cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who once lived there, trapped in the tangled roots and towering trees. The forest is so dense that even in the middle of the day, it's nearly impossible to tell where the shadows end and the darkness begins. But that's not the creepiest part. For hundreds of years, people have been disappearing in the Black Forest. Travelers, hunters, even whole families have ventured in and were never seen again. The local legends say that the forest doesn't just take you, it claims you. Those who disappear are said to become part of the forest, their souls trapped forever, their voices joining the endless whispers that echo through the trees. And if the forest calls to you, no matter how far you run, it will always bring you back. I didn't believe any of it until we camped there. It all started last summer when my wife Emma, our two kids Chloe and Luke, and I decided to take a trip to Europe. We wanted something different, something off the beaten path. We'd heard about the Black Forest, a place where fairy tales were born, but darker, more twisted than you'd think. We thought it would be fun, maybe a little spooky, but nothing we couldn't handle. The forest was a different world, ancient towering trees so dense that daylight barely pierced through. The air felt heavy, thick with history and something else. As we hiked deeper, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, but we chalked it up to nerves. After all, we were headed to the ruins of an old village deep in the heart of the forest, and who wouldn't feel a little spooked? The ruins were unsettling, just crumbling stones and old foundations left behind, swallowed by nature. Moss covered everything, and strange carvings marked the stones, symbols that looked like they belonged in some ancient ritual. We set up camp nearby, thinking it would make for a cool story later. That first night, things were eerily quiet. No animals, no rustling leaves. And then, we started hearing the whispers. At first they were faint, almost like the wind. But as the night dragged on, they grew louder, clearer. It wasn't just random noise, it was voices. Low, indistinct voices that seemed to be calling our names. The worst part? When I stepped outside the tent, I found symbols carved into the trees around us. The same ones we'd seen on the ruins.
Emma tried to laugh it off as a prank, but I saw the fear in her eyes.
The kids were scared too, but we convinced ourselves it was just the isolation playing tricks on our minds. If this story has you on edge, go ahead and hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a good scare. And don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales. The next day, Luke started acting weird. He kept staring into the woods, mumbling about hearing voices. We tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong.
That night it got worse, much worse.
It was around midnight when Emma woke me up.
Luke was gone. His sleeping bag was empty, the tent flap open. We grabbed our flashlights and ran into the woods, frantically calling his name. Panic clawed at my throat, but after what felt like hours, we found him. He was standing at the edge of the ruins, his back to us, staring into the darkness.
They're waiting,
he whispered when we approached.
They said we have to leave.
Who's waiting, Luke? I asked, my voice shaking. But he didn't answer. He just kept staring into the shadows. We got him back to the tent, but that night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the voices, the carvings, the way the forest seemed to breathe around us.
Emma was restless too. She'd been having nightmares about the ruins, about people who looked like us, but from another time. She said we had been there before, in a past life. She dreamed we had lived in the village that once stood where the ruins now lay, and we had done something terrible. In Emma's dreams, we had been part of a village ravaged by plague. Desperate to save ourselves, we had betrayed our neighbors, locking the sick outside the village walls and leaving them to die in the forest. Their spirits had become part of the forest, twisted and vengeful, waiting for the day we would return. We were drawn back to atone for what we'd done, to finish the cycle.
I didn't believe it at first, but the more she talked, the more familiar it all seemed. The carvings, the voices, it was like the forest had been waiting for us. We weren't just visitors, we were part of the curse. The next morning I wanted to leave, but Luke wouldn't budge. He kept insisting we couldn't leave yet.
They're not finished with us, he kept saying.
That's when things went completely off the rails. If this story has sent chills down your spine, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good scare, and subscribe for more terrifying stories like this one. And if you're brave enough, click the playlist in the top left to hear more tales that will keep you up at night. That afternoon, Luke disappeared again.
But this time he didn't go quietly.
As soon as we noticed he was missing, the forest seemed to come alive.
A thick fog rolled in from nowhere, swallowing the trees.
The air grew icy cold, and we heard something in the distance, a low guttural chanting.
We sprinted toward the ruins, adrenaline pumping, the fog so thick it was like running through a nightmare.
I could barely see Emma and Chloe ahead of me.
Branches whipped at our faces, and the ground seemed to shift beneath us, like the forest itself was trying to keep us from getting to Luke. When we reached the ruins, the fog parted just enough to reveal Luke standing at the center, surrounded by shadowy figures.
These weren't just shapes.
They were people, pale, hollow-eyed figures in tattered clothing, staring at us from the darkness.
And I recognized their faces.
They were us.
Emma screamed, but I grabbed her hand and pulled her back.
We needed to move, and fast.
The figures closed in, the chanting growing louder.
Luke's eyes had glazed over, like he wasn't even there anymore.
And that's when I realized we weren't just here by accident. We had come back to finish what we started. Those figures? They were the spirits of the villagers we had betrayed in another life. The Black Forest had claimed us once, and now it wanted us again.
We need to get out of here.
I shouted, pulling Emma and Chloe toward the trees. But the fog was thick, and every path we took seemed to lead us back to the ruins. Just when I thought we were trapped, I saw a flash of light, a way out.
We sprinted toward it, the figures chasing us, their whispers turning into screams.
My heart pounded as I shoved through the underbrush, the fog curling around my ankles like cold fingers. Suddenly, we burst out of the trees and found ourselves back on the main trail, the ruins and the fog disappearing behind us. We got back home trying to forget what happened, but strange things started happening.
Luke's behavior got worse.
He'd wake up in the middle of the night, standing at the window, staring into the darkness.
He said he could still hear them, the voices.
Chloe too.
She'd have nightmares about the ruins, about the figures closing in on us. And then one night, I woke up to find Luke gone.
The window in his room was wide open.
We searched everywhere, but there was no sign of him.
A week later, we got a call from a park ranger in Germany.
They found Luke.
Back at the ruins.
The forest had called him home.
We flew back immediately, but when we arrived, Luke was gone again.
The locals told us something we hadn't heard before, that those who are claimed by the Black Forest become part of it, forever. I refused to believe it.
But as we stood there, at the edge of the ruins, I heard it again.
The whispers.
And this time they were calling my name.
If this story has sent chills down your spine, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good scare, and subscribe for more terrifying stories like this one. And if you're brave enough, click the playlist in the top left to hear more tales that will keep you up at night. As for us, the forest still isn't finished with us. I know it, I feel it, and somehow I know we'll be going back, whether we want to or not, because some places never let you leave, and the Black Forest always remembers.